Now, the thing that jumped out at me was this, and we have been saying this is coming for a long time, an emergency halt to bail hearings as prisons run out of cells. I'm thinking, why, if they'd listened to talk a year ago when we had these conversations, I mean, it's the bleeding obvious, isn't it? So tell us about what actually happens now there's no prison cells.
Okay, so what we're talking about is, I guess, an emergency halt. Good afternoon, Trisha. Good afternoon to everybody at home and as always on the move. An emergency halt to bail hearings as prisons basically have run out of cells. Prison population has doubled in the last 20 years. Do we feel any safer? Certainly not. I think that's probably a damning indictment of this tough on law and order Conservative administration we've been dealing with for a decade and a half. Now, the plan is to keep defendants in police custody because they can't let them go to court where they might be remanded into custody in prison because there just aren't enough prison spaces. So this means that a court will now not hear your application for bail the next day after you get charged, sometimes with a mid-range offence where you'd probably expect to be given bail, maybe with bail conditions, but they won't hear your application straight away the next day, as they currently do, on the basis that if it's not successful, there's no prison to send you to. And they paint a picture of a prison van driving around until a prison space becomes available.
Like the ambulances.
Yeah, and we've been given similar kind of imagery from the press in respect of ambulances, and it's the same kind of thing. What you'll have is, and it's madness really, you've got people waiting in a police cell at the discretion of a police custody sergeant who's not going to, they're neutral in the investigation, but they're still police. They're unlikely to be as objective as a magistrate who would, in 50% of cases, give bail. They're the statistics. They're the government's own statistics. Half of bail applications in the magistrates' court are successful. But this means that, of course, the custody sergeant won't, the custody sergeant will now be under probably internal pressure, one can imagine, to give bail at the police station to as many defendants as possible, by contrast, not by a process where there are submissions from the prosecution and the magistrates, just because his superintendent, his or her superintendent, I should say, says, we haven't got any space left. And that's because they do not have the facilities. This is like during the fire strikes. Do you remember the idea of those green goddess fire engines from the war, us using those instead of real firemen and real fire engines? An 8 by 10 foot cell is not a suitable place to put a prisoner for days or weeks before they're even allowed to make a bail application. No cooking facilities, no showers. What happens is, well-meaning, if you're in there 24 hours or 36 hours, at their discretion, police officers will come and give you a sandwich out of a packet. Imagine that for 2 weeks. Trisha, this is just...
You know what?
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen? Sadly, you're going to see more instances of self-harm because often people might have a mental health problem. They come before the magistrates and the magistrates will not just bail them, but they'll have to be in contact with a mental health service or what have you. Yeah. It's scary, scary stuff.